inconvenient. Sometimes we often hope we won't be called to care in a drastic way. Sometimes we have to change our plans in order to care. But most of all, we need to be obedient when God calls us to care for other people. Today we would like to talk about the opportunity that some of us had in June to care for someone else, Katie Vree. I will talk about what happened at the Miami International Airport. Mrs. Visser will share what she did in the hospital to care for Katie. And Deanne Voss and Kari Bruinius will talk about how this incident with Katie has affected how they care about and for Katie as her friend. Before I start to tell you about what happened in Miami, I think it is important to know one detail about our trips to Guatemala. The first 2 years on our way down, we had major delays. The first year, our connecting flight was delayed by several hours in Miami International Airport, and one part of our group that flew down on a different flight ended up waiting several hours for us to arrive in Guatemala. The second year, because of mechanical difficulties with our plane in Chicago, we missed our connecting flight in Dallas, Texas, and had to stay overnight in Dallas, and wasted the whole next day waiting in airports to get on flights that would get us to Guatemala a whole day late. So this year, all we wanted to do, especially those who had been to Costa the year before, was to get to Guatemala without incident or delay. This past June, when we landed in Miami International Airport, Katie Vree came up to me immediately and told me that her left shoulder hurt and that she had some numbness and tingling in her left arm. I thought this was weird and asked her all sorts of questions that would soon be repeated by others. Things like, did you sleep on it wrong? Did you hit your shoulder on something? All to which she responded, no. So we decided to try to find a medical clinic and have someone check her out. At airports, they don't have such areas, so the paramedics were called. These first two paramedics didn't have such great bedside manners. They took Katie's vital signs and said that they were normal. One of the guys, who seemed so annoyed to have been called in, asked us if we wanted to go to the hospital. Katie started to cry because this question was a scary question. She didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, hey guy, aren't you supposed to tell us if this is serious enough that we should? And the last thing that Katie, who had been on the trip last year, or I wanted to do was to have to go to the hospital and not get to Guatemala. The two of us decided that she would take an Advil and we would wait 1 hour and see how things went. So Katie got some medicine and she and I decided to walk down to Wendy's to get some food. As we started walking, I noticed that when she was walking, she was kind of drifting to the left. This was really strange. She said the numbness was moving into her leg and she felt kind of off balance. This made me think of my dad. About 3 years ago, he had hit his head on the corner of a roof, forgot that he did so, and had a brain bleed for about 2 months, at which time he had an incident one night where he lost his equilibrium and couldn't get his legs to work to walk back into his bedroom. He ended up having emergency brain surgery to fix this. This is what I was thinking about when we continued to walk. Could she have a brain bleed? Is this a stroke? Her vitals are fine, so it can't be a stroke. I just didn't know what to do. I wanted to take care of Katie, but I wasn't sure what the right decision was. Numbness and tingling don't sound like really serious issues. I think Katie and I were both just hoping that her left side would wake up and this would all go away so we could get to Guatemala. But I also knew that if this was serious, then the last place Katie should be was in Guatemala. After we got some food, the pain started to get worse. I went to find Mrs. Visser and Mrs. Alcantar, the two other female leaders on the trip. I needed to bounce my ideas and thoughts off them and ask them for help in making the right decision about how to care for Katie in this situation. I told them that I thought we needed to bring Katie to the hospital and change her flight for the following morning, but I wasn't sure who should go with. I felt like since I was in charge, I should go with her, but I also felt like I needed to get everyone else to Guatemala since I was the only adult leader who knew where we were going and who had been there before. As soon as I asked who should stay, Mrs. Visser immediately said that she would stay behind if necessary. This was such a relief for me. It took the burden of staying or going off my shoulders. We then walked back over to the ticket counter. By this time, Katie was really worked up because she was in a lot of pain. I went up to the ticket counter and asked them to change Katie's and Mrs. Visser's flight and to call the paramedics to come. While we waited, I started making Katie do some math problems to get her mind off the pain and to keep her from getting too worked up. We called Katie's parents to let them know what was going on and that we were going to bring Katie to the hospital. Then the second group of paramedics showed up. There were 3 of them this time, and they were much nicer than the first group. They took Katie's vitals again, and this is where it became difficult for me. When they saw that her vital signs were fine, they started telling us that they see these kinds of situations all the time and that Katie should be able to get on the plane. Uh-oh. What should we do now? What is the best care for Katie? We had just told her parents she was going to the hospital with Mrs. Visser. So I asked one of the paramedics to call the Vrees and explain why they thought she should be able to get on the plane. Meanwhile, Mrs. Alcantar, bless her heart, spoke up. She said to one of the other paramedics that Katie was having difficulty walking and standing. She was convinced that they needed to see her try to stand up on her own. So after a few minutes of talking about this, we asked Katie to try to stand up by herself without help. As soon as she did, she fell towards her left side. This is when the other paramedic said, yeah, we're going to take her to the hospital. This isn't normal. Little did we know then how important that decision was going to be. So they brought in the stretcher, strapped Katie to it, and with many hugs and good wishes and much prayer, Katie and Mrs. Visser got in an ambulance headed for the hospital. We made it to Guatemala on time and had a good time while we were there, but Katie was always on our minds, in our prayers, and part of our conversations as we continued to get updates throughout the week. We spent our week caring for Katie the only way we could at that point, by lifting her up in prayer and laying our concerns and fears at the foot of the throne of the Lord. I wanted to share with you what it is like to make decisions when people are in need and how you need to listen to the prompting of the Spirit and put the needs of others ahead of your own. Now Mrs. Visser is going to share a very powerful account of how she was called to care for Katie in a very up-close and personal way within the first 24 hours of Katie's incident at the airport.
Well, I didn't realize it when I signed up for the trip. By the time the end of last school year came around and we were making final plans for Guatemala, I knew God had led me to sign up for the trip because in many ways my faith was in a rut. I was stuck in a routine and struggling to sense God's presence in my daily life. I prayed that God would show himself and that I would feel his presence in a very real way on the trip. I had expected this to happen once I got to Guatemala. Instead, God revealed himself to me before I even left the U.S. At the Miami airport on our layover, I felt the need to tell Mrs. Roozeboom that if someone needed to stay back with Katie, it should be me. In part, I think I felt this way because it would be less of a responsibility to care for one kid in the U.S. than to take charge of 30 kids in a foreign country that I had never been to. We had moved our tickets to the next morning, having all intentions of being able to fly out by then, and left the airport in an ambulance. We were brought to the Miami Metro Hospital. That was short-staffed, and Katie and I had trouble communicating with several of the staff who spoke English as a second language. Katie was questioned at least 5 times by different nurses and doctors, all wanting to know when it had started, what were the symptoms, had this happened before? Eventually, I knew all Katie's answers and just started talking for her as she was getting worn out and sick of saying the same thing over and over again. I didn't even know who Katie was before the trip, but as we waited at the hospital, I worked my hardest to try to make conversation to fill the time we spent waiting. How old was Katie? Who was in her family? Where did she go to church? What hobbies did she have? Due to the limited staff, when Katie needed something like a drink of water, I had to get it. At one point, she told me to stop leaving the room. She didn't want to be alone. Later, when the doctor began to question if Katie was having a stroke and decided she needed to be moved to another hospital, she made me promise to ride in the back of the ambulance by her, rather than in the front, like the first time. She barely knew me, but I realized that to Katie, who was so far from any of her family or close friends, one familiar face was better than being all alone. It was then that I told myself I would not leave Katie's side unless absolutely necessary. Much later in the night, you should have heard me trying to convince the doctors, who thought they needed to ask Katie some questions alone, that it really was best to let me stay in the room next to her. Waiting at the Metro Hospital to be transferred, I asked Katie if she would like me to read from her book that she had along, or maybe put on the TV. She said that she would like to hear Bible stories and said that parables were her favorite. I read to her and we prayed together while we were waiting. Katie's numbness, the whole time we were there we referred to it as numbness because paralysis sounded so much scarier. Her numbness continued to spread down her body and to the other side. While we waited to hear what the doctors would decide and what would happen next, I remember thinking how unexpected and far from normal things were. I mean, I had anticipated a missions trip to Guatemala, not being in a hospital that didn't seem very safe, trying to get to know a girl named Katie who was gradually becoming more numb, helping a nurse undress her when it was time for an x-ray because there was no one else around. Was this more awkward for Katie as a student or for me as a teacher? At points, I simply ran out of things to say. I wanted to assure her everything would be okay, but I was feeling less and less certain that this would go away and we could fly to Guatemala the next morning. Should I call her parents and let them know things were getting worse? Was that my job or the doctor's? The hospital didn't seem like a good place for Katie to be through all this, but could I ask to be brought to a different hospital? I kept feeling like we should be panicking or worried or something, but then I would look at Katie and see the peace that she had